the infamous Sing Sing prison, home of the death chamber. For nearly 2 centuries, this place has stood as a warning. A fortress of stone and steel where time doesn't heal, it erodes. Men entered these gates knowing they might never leave. Some were innocent. Some were guilty. And some were marched down a corridor so final, so feared, it earned a name whispered across America, the death chamber. What happened inside Sing Sing was not just punishment. It was a system designed to break, to control, and sometimes, to kill. And what happens later in this story is far more unsettling than the executions themselves. A prison built to terrify. Sing Sing Correctional Facility was built in 1826, perched along the eastern bank of the Hudson River in Ossining, New York. From the beginning, it was never meant to rehabilitate. It was meant to intimidate. The prison was constructed largely by inmate labor. Men in chains quarried the stone that would later cage them. Each block was lifted by hands already condemned by the system. From its earliest days, Sing Sing blurred the line between justice and cruelty. Inside these walls, silence was once enforced as law. Not encouraged. Not requested. Enforced. Prisoners were forbidden from speaking. A cough could earn punishment. A glance could provoke violence. The philosophy was simple: break the spirit, and the body will follow. But even this was only the beginning. Entering the machine. For every man who entered Sing Sing, the first lesson came quickly: you no longer belong to yourself. New arrivals were stripped, searched, shaved, and assigned a number. Names were irrelevant. Identity was dangerous. Guards controlled everything: movement, meals, sleep, and survival itself. Cells were narrow, barely wide enough to stretch your arms. Iron bars replaced doors. Stone walls trapped cold in winter and heat in summer. There was no privacy, no comfort, and no escape from the constant awareness that you were being watched. But the fear did not come from the walls. It came from what the walls contained. Because somewhere inside this prison, hidden from most inmates, stood a room that would define Sing Sing's reputation forever. And many prisoners would spend years wondering if they would ever see it. Daily life inside Sing Sing. Life inside Sing Sing followed a rigid routine. Not for efficiency, but for control. The day began before sunrise. Cell doors clanged open in sequence, a mechanical rhythm that never changed. Breakfast was silent. Meals were rushed. Any delay was punished. Work assignments varied. Some inmates labored in the prison workshops. Others cleaned corridors, maintained facilities, or cooked meals they would never enjoy themselves. Refusal was not an option. Punishment was swift and public. Solitary confinement, known as the box, was used frequently. Cells without light. Without sound. Without time. Men emerged disoriented, shaking, and changed. Survival required obedience. But obedience offered no protection. Because Sing Sing was not just governed by guards. It was ruled by an invisible hierarchy. Power, fear, and unwritten rules. Inside Sing Sing, power moved quietly. The strongest men were not always the most violent. They were the most connected. Inmate alliances formed along lines of race, background, and crime. Information was currency. Silence was safety. Loyalty could save your life, or end it. Certain prisoners were given favors. Better jobs. Safer housing. In exchange, they kept order for the guards. Violence was often allowed to happen, as long as it stayed controlled. Snitching was unforgivable. Debt was dangerous. And curiosity could be deadly. Every inmate learned the same rule: never ask too many questions. Especially about the death house. Because those who did often learned the answer the hard way. The death house emerges. Sing Sing became the execution center for the state of New York in the late 19th century. Men sentenced to death from across the state were transferred here to die. They were housed in a separate unit known simply as death row. Few inmates ever saw it. Fewer still returned from it. Executions were originally carried out by hanging. But public hangings became controversial. Too unpredictable. Too brutal. So the state searched for something more controlled. What they introduced instead would make Sing Sing infamous worldwide. And the man who designed it believed he was making executions more humane. History would prove him wrong. Birth of the electric chair. In 1890, Sing Sing became the first prison in the world to execute a human being using electricity. The electric chair. It was called Old Sparky. Officials claimed it was painless, quick, scientific. But the reality was far different. The condemned were strapped into a wooden chair. Leather restraints bound their arms, legs, and chest. A metal cap was pressed onto a shaved scalp. Electrodes were attached. Witnesses stood behind glass. Doctors monitored pulse. Guards waited for instructions. When the switch was thrown, the body convulsed violently. Flesh burned. Smoke sometimes rose from the head. Executions often took multiple jolts, and the men waiting on death row could hear it. This was not mercy. It was theater. And Sing Sing became its stage. Waiting to die. Life on death row was a slow psychological dismantling. Inmates lived inches from each other, separated by bars and fate. They were allowed limited visits. Limited letters. Limited hope. Some counted days. Some stopped counting altogether. The worst part was not the execution itself. It was the waiting. Men listened for footsteps in the night. Guards approaching a cell could mean transfer, or death. Final meals were offered. Final words recorded. Some prisoners broke down. Others appeared calm. A few maintained their innocence until the end. And occasionally, someone was executed who should never have been there. That reality would come back to haunt Sing Sing decades later. Famous names, last moments. Over the years, Sing Sing executed some of the most notorious criminals in American history. Murderers. Mob figures. Men whose names filled headlines. But notoriety offered no comfort in the end. Every execution followed the same routine. Same walk. Same chair. Same silence. And with each death, the prison's reputation grew darker. Yet behind the scenes, something was changing. Public opinion was shifting. Doubts were forming. And the walls of Sing Sing were beginning to crack, not physically, but morally. What happened next would challenge the very existence of the death penalty in New York. The men who threw the switch. Executions are often discussed as events. Dates on a calendar. Lines in court records. But behind every execution at Sing Sing were men who had to make it happen. Guards escorted the condemned. Wardens read death warrants aloud. Doctors checked pulses. And one man, never publicly identified, threw the switch. That role carried a weight few could bear for long. Former employees later described sleepless nights, alcoholism, sudden resignations. Some refused to speak about their time at Sing Sing ever again. Others claimed the sounds never left them, the crack of electricity, the gasp, the moment when the body went still. Officially, these men were performing a duty. Unofficially, many were unraveling. And this psychological toll did not stay hidden forever. When the system gets it wrong. As years passed, cracks began to appear in the justice system that fed Sing Sing its condemned. Appeals were rushed. Evidence was flawed. Confessions were coerced. In some cases, defense attorneys barely tried. And then came the cases that shook public confidence. Men executed on testimony that later collapsed. Witnesses who recanted. Evidence that disappeared. There was no way to undo what had been done. Sing Sing, once presented as a symbol of order, began to look like a factory of irreversible mistakes. The question was no longer whether executions were cruel. It was whether the system deserved the power to perform them at all. And outside the prison walls, voices were growing louder. The rising backlash. By the mid-20th century, the death penalty faced growing resistance. Religious leaders, legal scholars, journalists, and former prison staff began speaking openly against it. Sing Sing was central to the debate. The electric chair, once promoted as humane, was now viewed as barbaric. Graphic accounts of botched executions reached the public. Stories of innocent men dying in the chair circulated widely. Even some officials who once defended the system began to hesitate. The prison that had embodied finality was now surrounded by doubt. And inside Sing Sing, executions continued, quietly, methodically, while the world outside questioned whether they should exist at all. What finally ended it was not a single protest, or a single case. It was a shift in how society understood justice itself. The last executions. In 1963, Sing Sing carried out its final execution. The electric chair went silent. Not because the prison changed overnight, but because the state did. New York began dismantling its use of capital punishment, influenced by legal challenges and public pressure. The death chamber remained, unused, like a scar the building could not erase. Men who once would have been transferred to Sing Sing for execution were now sentenced differently. But the shadow of what had happened there did not fade. Former inmates said the knowledge lingered. Even without executions, Sing Sing felt haunted. A place where death had once been routine does not forget easily. And neither does the nation that built it. Life after the death chamber. Today, Sing Sing still operates as a maximum security prison. The routines remain strict. The walls remain imposing. But the death house is no longer active. New programs focus on education and rehabilitation. Some inmates attend college courses. Others work in theater programs that perform Shakespeare, ironically exploring themes of guilt, punishment, and redemption inside a place once defined by none of them. Yet the past is never far away. Cells once held condemned men. Corridors once echoed with final footsteps. Guards still walk routes mapped by history. Sing Sing did not stop being Sing Sing just because executions ended. It simply learned to live with what it had done. The legacy of Sing Sing. Sing Sing is more than a prison. It is a record of how power was exercised when fear ruled policy. A reminder of what happens when systems prioritize certainty over truth. For nearly a century, the state decided who would live and who would die within these walls. Many deserved punishment. Some did not. But all were subject to a machine that could not feel doubt. The death chamber at Sing Sing is no longer active. But the questions it raised remain unanswered. Can justice ever be final? Can punishment undo harm? And who bears responsibility when the system gets it wrong? Sing Sing still stands, silent, watchful, unchanged. A place where the line between justice and cruelty was once drawn in electricity and smoke. The men who died here are gone. The chair is silent. But the memory endures. Because the most unsettling truth about Sing Sing is not what happened inside its death chamber. It's that it was once considered normal. And history has a way of asking us whether we have truly learned from places like this, or whether we are simply waiting to repeat them. Voices from Death Row. Some of the most haunting remnants of Sing Sing are not its walls or its cells. They are the words left behind. Letters written by condemned men in the final weeks of their lives still exist. Some were addressed to family members who never visited. Others were written to governors, judges, or anyone who might listen. Many insisted on their innocence until the very end. Others admitted guilt, but begged to be remembered as more than their worst act. What is striking is not the fear in these letters. It is the clarity. Men facing death often wrote with calm precision. They apologized. They reflected. They asked questions no one could answer. What happens after the switch is thrown? Does suffering end, or simply change form? For inmates elsewhere in the prison, these letters circulated quietly. Passed hand to hand. Read in silence. They served as warnings and mirrors. Because every man inside Sing Sing knew how thin the line really was. The walk that never left them. Among former inmates, one memory surfaced again and again. The walk. Condemned prisoners were escorted from death row to the execution chamber along a specific route. Guards timed it. The path was cleared. Doors were opened in sequence. Those housed nearby could hear it. The footsteps. The pause at each gate. The final stop. Even men serving life sentences described freezing in place when they heard that walk. Conversations ended. Bodies stiffened. Some inmates prayed. Others turned to the wall. No one needed to ask what was happening. That sound became part of Sing Sing's atmosphere. A reminder that punishment here was not theoretical. It was terminal. And for many, it reshaped how they understood survival. How inmates coped with the inescapable. Living in proximity to death required mental armor. Some inmates hardened themselves, refusing to think about the chair. Others developed rituals, prayers, routines, superstitions, anything to create the illusion of control. Religion flourished in Sing Sing, not because faith was encouraged, but because fear demanded answers. Chaplains were often the last people condemned men spoke to. For inmates not on death row, religion was also protection. A way to believe there was meaning beyond the walls. Beyond the system. But not everyone turned inward. Some turned angry. Violence inside Sing Sing often spiked after executions. Guards noticed it. Administrators documented it. The tension rippled through the prison like a shockwave. Death did not bring closure. It brought instability. And that reality forced even the most hardened officials to reconsider what executions were really accomplishing. The guards who couldn't escape. For correctional officers, Sing Sing was never just a job. Many came from nearby towns. Some had family members who worked there before them. Employment at Sing Sing was often generational. But the death chamber changed everything. Guards assigned to death row carried the knowledge home with them. Some avoided talking about work entirely. Others became withdrawn. Marriages failed. Drinking increased. A few later admitted they felt trapped, unable to quit, unable to forget. Unlike inmates, guards could leave the prison each night. But mentally, many never did. And when executions ended, something unexpected happened. Some guards felt relief. Others felt loss. Because when an institution builds its identity around finality, removing it leaves a void no one knows how to fill. The room that still exists. The execution chamber at Sing Sing was never demolished. It still exists. The chair remains stored away, unseen by the public, but not destroyed. The room is preserved, not as a memorial, but as a function of bureaucracy. Former staff have described the space as unervingly ordinary. Plain walls. Stark lighting. No ceremony. That may be the most disturbing detail of all. There was nothing dramatic about the place where men died. No sense of gravity built into the architecture. Just a room designed to complete a task. And that design choice speaks volumes about how normalized death had become inside the system. Modern reckoning. In the decades since Sing Sing's final execution, the United States has continued to wrestle with the death penalty. Cases once considered closed have been reopened. DNA evidence has exonerated men sentenced to die. Public confidence has eroded. Sing Sing is often cited in these debates, not as an anomaly, but as an example. It represents what happens when punishment outruns certainty. When institutions become so focused on enforcing law that they forget to question it. And while Sing Sing no longer executes prisoners, its legacy influences every conversation about capital punishment that follows. What Sing Sing teaches us. Sing Sing was never just about crime. It was about power. About control. About the belief that the state could decide when a life no longer deserved to continue. For years, that belief went largely unquestioned. Until the consequences became impossible to ignore. The prison did exactly what it was designed to do. That is the most uncomfortable truth. And perhaps the most important lesson is not that Sing Sing failed, but that it succeeded in a system that asked too little of itself. Sing Sing still stands beside the Hudson, unchanged in stone but heavy with memory. The men who died there cannot be brought back. The decisions made inside those walls cannot be undone. But remembrance is not passive. Every generation inherits places like Sing Sing, not to admire them, but to interrogate them. To ask what kind of justice they represent. And whether we are willing to accept its cost. Because the most dangerous thing about Sing Sing was never the electric chair. It was how easily society learned to live with it. One night on death row. There were nights on death row that never made it into records. Nights when nothing happened, no execution scheduled, no legal updates, no movement beyond routine checks. Those nights were often the hardest. Condemned men lay awake on narrow bunks, listening to the building breathe. Pipes rattled. Keys clinked in the distance. Somewhere, a door slammed shut. Sleep came in fragments. Every sound carried meaning. A pause outside a cell could signal bad news. A whispered conversation between guards could ignite panic. Some inmates pressed their ears to the bars, desperate for clues. Others forced themselves not to listen at all. Because the mind, when given too much time, can be more cruel than any institution. And Sing Sing gave men nothing but time. Last meals, last requests. The ritual of the last meal was meant to be an act of mercy. Condemned inmates were allowed to request a final meal, within reason. Some asked for elaborate dishes. Others requested only coffee, or bread, or nothing at all. Guards observed quietly. Doctors waited nearby. Everything was documented. But the ritual rarely provided comfort. Many inmates could not eat. Food went cold. Hands shook too badly to lift utensils. Some pushed the tray away untouched, staring instead at the wall. Final requests were sometimes granted, sometimes denied. A last cigarette. A final letter. A visit from a priest. These moments were controlled down to the minute. Even death, at Sing Sing, operated on a schedule. The moment before. Witnesses often described the final moments before execution as eerily calm. The condemned was escorted from the cell. Restraints were applied. Procedures followed precisely. No shouting. No chaos. Silence dominated the space. Some men spoke final words. Others said nothing at all. A few looked directly at witnesses, as if trying to be remembered. Then came the signal. The room tensed. And in that instant, before electricity surged, before the body reacted, time seemed to hesitate. For those present, that pause was unforgettable. Because it represented the point of no return. After the switch. Once the execution was complete, the process continued. Doctors confirmed death. Official statements were prepared. Paperwork was signed. The body was removed. By morning, Sing Sing returned to routine. Cells opened. Breakfast was served. Work assignments resumed. Guards took their posts. Life went on. That contrast, between finality and normalcy, was one of the most disturbing aspects of the prison. Death was not an interruption. It was incorporated. How inmates talked about death. In the general population, executions were rarely discussed directly. Instead, inmates spoke in coded language. He's moving. They took him. It happened last night. Everyone understood. Some inmates reacted with fear, others with indifference. A few treated executions as cautionary tales, proof of what happened when you lost control. But beneath the surface, something deeper stirred. Executions forced inmates to confront the idea that the system was absolute. That no appeal, no argument, no transformation could always save you. And once that belief takes root, it changes how men see authority forever. The quiet resistance. Not all resistance inside Sing Sing was violent. Some inmates studied law obsessively, filing appeals not only for themselves but for others. Jailhouse lawyers became lifelines for condemned men with limited resources. Others documented abuses, writing letters that made their way beyond the walls. A few refused to break, maintaining dignity, routine, and self-control as acts of defiance. These quiet forms of resistance rarely made headlines. But they chipped away at the idea that Sing Sing could fully dominate the human spirit. When executions stopped, fear didn't. When executions ended, some believed the fear would disappear with them. It did not. The memory lingered. The architecture still told the story. Inmates knew exactly what those cells had once been used for. Guards, too, carried habits formed during the execution era: extra caution, emotional distance, silence. The prison had adapted to death for so long that removing it did not erase its influence. Sing Sing had been shaped by the death chamber. And shaping something for decades leaves permanent marks. The prison as a symbol. Over time, Sing Sing became more than a correctional facility. It became shorthand. A symbol invoked in movies, books, conversations. A name associated instantly with punishment and finality. Few people who used the name understood its full history. Fewer still grasped what daily life inside had actually been like. But symbols matter. They influence how societies think about justice, about who deserves mercy and who does not. And Sing Sing's symbol was forged in electricity. The question that remains. Today, debates about punishment continue. Laws change. Policies evolve. But the core question remains unresolved. How much power should any system have over a human life? Sing Sing offers no simple answers. It offers a record. A warning. A reminder of what happens when certainty replaces humility. Because the men who died there were not abstractions. They were human beings, reduced to case numbers and procedures. And once a system accepts that reduction, the consequences echo far beyond its walls. Sing Sing endures, not because it is proud of its past, but because it cannot escape it. The death chamber no longer hums. The chair no longer waits. But the legacy remains, carved into stone and memory. This place forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Justice, when stripped of reflection, becomes something else entirely. And if Sing Sing teaches anything, it is that the most dangerous prisons are not just built with walls and bars, but with certainty that never stops to question itself. Sing Sing no longer carries out executions, but the questions it raised are still alive. How justice is defined. Who holds power over life? And what happens when certainty replaces compassion? Places like this are not meant to be forgotten. They are meant to be remembered carefully, so history doesn't quietly repeat itself. Because the most unsettling legacy of Sing Sing isn't the death chamber itself. It's how long the world accepted it as normal.